you. Thank you, Josh. And thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be back at Trinity. And actually, this facility is very beautiful. We used to be over in that mail barn when I was here. So I feel like I learned a lot about making do and being creative with what you have. I'm just going to start right in with this. And forgive me if I get a little nervous. I'm definitely a visual artist, and I like my work to speak for me. So when I have to use words, it's it's a whole different thing. So this is not my work. This is Renika Dijkstra's photograph. Starting actually in aesthetics class with Dr. Ruttman, I got very interested in the idea of transitional beauty. It was symposium, Plato symposium, talking about love existing between two people, and that's like the purest form of, this entity that we can't qualify. And it's beautiful because you can't, or of beauty actually. And it's beautiful because you can't hold on to it and you can't capture it and you can't put it in your pocket. So I wrote multiple artist statements about that. I made a lot of work where I said that's what I was talking about. And this is an artist that I think captures transition really beautifully. So her subjects are neither adult nor child. They're kind of on the shoreline between the water and the land. They're not clothed, they're not naked. There's like this very sort of unsettling in between with the subjects. She did a series all over the world, traveled to a bunch of different countries and just took these portraits of teenagers on the beach. Another artist that I really like for her use of transition is Eva Hesse. She was never terribly worried about whether her work was archival, which is something I can relate to, but she would use latex and it would deteriorate, and she would talk about that being part of the work. And her forms are really, really beautiful too. So this is actually the first piece I made that was moving. This is actually my second year of grad school. I'm skipping a whole lot of transitional searching. Leading up to grad school, my whole first year, I had all these balloons in my studio and I was deflating them, and I was really into the process. I was coating them with a adhesive mixture, so there was Elmer's glue and some polyurethane, and as the latex deflated, it would sort of crackle and pull away from the surface, and I just thought it was amazing. I loved making my work, but when I showed it to people, I only ever showed the deflated part, and they were like, oh, it's kind of sad and there's a lack, and I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in those things, but it's really active, and that just wasn't ever being communicated with the work. So for this piece, these are 3-foot balloons, and this is installed in a big industrial space in Detroit, and I installed them inflated, and I pricked each one at the beginning of the opening, and throughout the course of the night, they were crinkling and they were, doing their thing, ending up in the latter state. So it was kind of the first time where I was like, well, that's really working a lot more toward this idea of transition than, just showing the carcass of what I had a really good time making. At the same time, I was taking these photographs, which actually, if you know the artist Robert Heineken, he does a very similar thing. I had never seen his work the entire time I was making these, so I never really ended up showing them because I was like, oh, well, he kind of did what I wanted to do, which happens all the time, unfortunately. But so basically what these are, it's a double exposure, but they're in real life. So I was ripping pages out of fashion magazines and putting them up on the window, and the two sides of the page would combine. And I just thought it was pretty amazing that these weird, surreal combinations existed in the real world. And you just had to, add light and pay attention, and you could see these funny things. And I also sort of started controlling the lighting in these. I added this, it's a water glass shadow, so some refracting light. This was dramatic, so most of the shadows, it's kind of hard to see up here, but I added a little bit of the lighting shadows. I let the light come through and then I added a shadow. So I was sort of playing with them almost as portraits in a way. And then here is the first mechanized piece. In my studio, again, talking about transition, having all these objects, I've always wanted to feel my way through my work a lot. With this piece, I made a plan, and it actually worked out really well. I was eating breakfast, and I had drawn the pull strings, and I was like, God, what do I do with this form? I'm really interested in them. And I, I distinctly remember drawing this arrow. It went down and it went up, and I was like, of course, it's a pull string. It's the thing you use to turn on a light, and what you pull it down and it goes back up. And I was like, that's what it needs to do. So sort of frenzied, went back. I was in grad school at the time. I found someone who uses motors, borrowed her motor, found like a sour cream cap in the kitchen, like kind of drilled it out and made it, go up and down the wall. I'll show you that video. And I pretty much have been using motors ever since then. This was sort of a breakthrough for me. It's like when things sort of clicked. And then, still zooming out here. All right, we'll let that play. And then I actually innovated the piece to something that you might be familiar with from this exhibition, which is the freestanding pull string. A little bit more like the motion of actually pulling it. So it's actually the first iteration of it. I didn't even know how to connect anything to a shaft, so I found this plumbing part and sort of attached it. And then this piece moving on the side is actually a zip tie just stuck through the wood. So it's very based on what's available. I find the motion that I want first and then sort of work towards it with whatever I can find. I'm going to talk about the drawings real quick, and this will all tie together, I promise. Not my drawing. This is Cy Twombly. Definitely an influence on the types of drawings I make. And also the spaces, the sculptures, I sort of think of his marks as like a little twitch over there, and he finds a really great balance on the page, awkward and interesting, and I definitely have been influenced by his mark making. This is one of my drawings. So these drawings are made all at home, all at the kitchen. Well, okay, I'm gonna use home a little bit loosely, but at the kitchen table, always at a table, always sitting, being still, kind of allowing the space to wash over me while I'm sitting there. So taking in, the drip in the sink and the fly buzzing overhead. And it sort of becomes, it's a meditative process for sure, but it helps me understand spaces. It helps me think of new sculptures to make. And quite honestly, in a practical manner, it's something that I can do when I'm not sure what to make. Just like the blank page is kind of scary for someone who's writing, just like a canvas can be really daunting. I sort of, when you don't know what to do, for me it's really important to keep my hands moving. So this is something I can do. I get to a new studio space and I'm like, I'm gonna make a drawing. I know I can do that. And a lot of times it helps me sort of settle in and understand where I am. This one was made at Oxbow. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's in Saugatuck, Michigan, but you can definitely see the dunes and the water and the wind sort of play into it. So the marks change based on where I am, obviously. This one's from a memory, which I don't do very often, but I kind of pulled it all out of my own head from my bedroom growing up in the backyard. This is leftovers in the refrigerator without looking at them. This is, a lot of them have to do with cycles, things building up and tearing down. A lot of times the marks could reference, let's just go with the horizontal lines. They could be blinds that I'm looking at that are keeping the light out of the space. They could be plates building up next to the sink. They could be stairs. I try not to get too caught up on the mark that I'm making. I'm not trying to render or anything like that. I'm trying to sort of keep my mind detached in sort of a contemplative manner. So. And then recently, actually, it's been over a year now, my husband and I, we bought a little Winnebago, a 20-foot Winnebago, so we can go on the road. Actually, entirely kind of the dream came around these drawings. I was like, I want the kitchen table to go down the road and go to different places. So I still have this interior space, domestic-ish, I guess. That's why I said I'm gonna use home loosely, because in this case, home moves with you. But you can kind of see how the marks sort of get moved toward the middle unintentionally, but it's this space is with me and then all these things are passing by. So just another way to sort of understand space. Okay, so space. I've been talking about space a lot. Again, to reference another artist, this is Rachel Whiteread. She casts negative spaces, which I think is a really beautiful notion. Was early on very influential on my work. It's not the thing that's the artwork, it's the space between. Go figure, I kind of like that idea. These are bookshelves in a library. So I had this notion that I really wanted to define space with ropes, and I was interested in play quite a bit. I like to keep things light and something that you can relate to, but then also maybe can go to a deeper level as well. So double Dutch was something I became interested in, and I made this mock-up, and I was like, I really want to do the big version of this, which I needed help with because I'm not, if you can't tell, the way I came into this, I'm sort of like, I want this to happen, and then I, find my little motor and I figure out how to do it. The larger version took like a lot of welding, a laser cutter to cut its own gears. So not the type of form I usually make, but I think the space defined by the ropes, they have trouble getting going. So it's kind of all about this space defined between the ropes. It's about the players, the people spinning the rope, the person that could be jumping, just sort of these implied presence that like someone could be here, or, just thinking about space between things once again. It's actually, in this case, it was run by a drill motor, just sort of like hooked onto the back. So it's never been freestanding. It's a goal I have to make that happen. Whoops. Okay, you're gonna have to, this piece has a few qualifiers. I'm actually I always get weirded out when I show this piece. I'll show you first and then I'll explain what happened. That's a live fly. That's a live fly. On a thread, yes. So I had this impulse, like, I wasn't sure if I should even follow it, but I was like, I really think, so there's like the light that comes from the light bulb, right? And like the fly's attracted to the light bulb, and like what if the fly was stuck to the light bulb? And I just got like really into this idea. I was like, I really want to see this happen. So I'm online, and apparently people used to do this. It's on YouTube. Like people with pet flies, they, if you have long hair or a thread, you like tie the little leg on and you can like have a fly, I guess. And I was like, how in the world do you do this? You make them a little bit cold and they don't fly around and you can tie it on. So anyway, this fly was not hurt in the process of making this piece. He was tied to a light bulb for about a minute and then I let him go. But I don't use living things. It made me feel kind of bad anyway. But I did get to see this, amazing sort of relationship where this housefly is tethered to something that it actually is attracted to. So also in the vein of defining spaces, this piece was actually, I was at a wedding, and there was a table with a vent under it, and I was like, that's really funny. Like the tablecloth was kind of blowing up, and then I sort of thought of Marilyn Monroe, and I was like, I really want to make that piece. So this is iteration 1. You've seen iteration 2 as well. But I like using these iconic images or these things that people can relate to. It's an object that you have a relationship with. So when you see this piece, you can bring either your relationship to the idea or your relationship to the object to it. So it's sort of, it is abstracted enough that you can relate to it in a different way. And I think that makes it a more powerful piece, or I like to use that in my work anyway. This is here. This is the debut of I Feel So Sorry for You in Those Hot Pants Too. It's the line that Marilyn Monroe says in the movie when her skirt blows up. It's a hot day and she feels sorry for the guy wearing pants. Anyway. All right, a couple more artists that have influenced my work. This is Ceal Floyer. This piece is called Solo, and it's just a microphone stand with a hairbrush on it. And I think it's like really amazing that she can take 2 objects, put them together, call it Solo, and all of a sudden it's this like really amazing reference to like the person in the bathroom who loves to sing but will never be a star, or I don't know. I love how poignant her gestures are. This is Robert Gober. I'm sure you know quite a few of these artists. He uses the object itself to become the subject matter, and because the sink is a place that you are cleansed and there's a drain that goes to a void, both of those things sort of become related to the body and related to the person, and I've loved his work for a really long time. So this piece is called Bless You. You'll get a little zoom in a minute so you can tell what's going on a little better. You see that? So it's a feather on the end of a string moving back and forth on top of a pile of pepper. And I was interested in sensations that you can't control, like being tickled or sneezing, and that's sort of what happened. The working title for this piece was Sisyphus for a long time, referring to the Greek myth where I think he was a king. He had to roll the boulder up the hill only to have it fall back down. So there's this sort of like domestic notion that, even related to the kitchen table series where, things are being made dirty just so you can clean them up again. Just sort of thinking about ideas like that. I actually did this piece first. I wanted to disrupt a pendulum, make it swing a little bit further the other way. So this piece sort of became all about the disruption of time, and the level was just part of setting it up. You need to make sure that the motor's level before it'll actually work properly. And then I was like, it sort of became all about, measurements and standards, and then this like playful disruption of it by putting the red ball in the way. It's a long video. Usually they're too short. Another piece that you're familiar with. It's called Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge or Vice Versa, relating to lines and spaces. Every good boy deserves fudge is the treble clef. It's the lines on the treble clef. And because it bounces every other time, I thought it had a really nice, kind of like metronomic irregularity. It has sort of a nice reference to disrupting the unexpected, I guess. And this piece was inspired by a cartoon. This is the Pink Panther. It just cracked me up. I don't know why I was watching the Pink Panther in the first place, but this guy's like the evil dude, he's like trying to get the Pink Panther to drink this poisonous drink, and it's in the blender. And while he's waiting, instead of just like sitting there, he pulls out his little paddle ball and did this for a little while. And I was like, I really want to see like a big red ball bounce. Like, kind of became this gesture of waiting. Probably only to me, because you sort of need to see that to get that part. Another debut that happened here. This is a brand new piece called Sheesh. With the title, I liked how the SH on both sides of the word sort of related to the spraying noise when you're spraying an aerosol can. It does the shh. Again, I try to think about, especially within each show, so I have motion. It's like, okay, I don't want to have every single piece with like a little twirling motor, 6 RPMs going around. Like, I try to think about like what kind of materials can off balance that, or like what gesture can I show that relates to that, but then there's no motion, or that type of thing. So this is Vapor, again, very beautiful to me. It sort of disappears. And then, obviously what I was talking about. So I feel like this piece has a lot of motion and a lot of gesture, but it's a more final, you can feel what happened before it. So it's more of a residual gesture called Done It. I've used this fly mobile in, so I didn't really want to use real flies anymore after I felt really bad that I tied a thread onto that little live fly. So this time I created the mobile where it revolves around the space, sort of annoys people overhead. It's actually the third time I've used that, but in this case it's relating to a lamp, and I feel like it's almost like the tumbleweed that's left after everything's gone or something, or the fly's sort of the little vulture, so like the lamp tips over and then the fly's stuck revolving overhead. Oh, a performance piece, great. I do these occasionally, and only when they're like, I felt like the idea was too good not to do it. I really don't love doing performance work. I'll let you watch it. It's a short clip of it. That's a straw going in between the floorboards. So it was a 20-minute performance, nothing super long. It probably would have been great if it was like, 24 hours or something like that. But I was thinking a lot about, actually, shoot, I don't have the words on here. There's a, Roland Barthes writes, it's in Mythologies, he writes about suds as being this sort of almost spiritual thing, like comes from nothing and, evolves. And it cleanses. And so I was really interested in this idea of suds. And then kind of talks about the way that commercials use it as this, magical cure for your dirt or whatever. So just trying to understand, he does a really great job of defining ideas that are like a big part of our culture and our understanding, I guess. I totally recommend that book, it's great. So that was the suds. And then these again, like I said, they didn't really end up going anywhere, but I do feel like they've informed my work. The space that I made was sort of related to like this wood floor and the light coming in behind. So I kind of desaturated my studio. Like I tried to make everything sort of black and white and surreal. And that was another photo I took that I really liked, the light. So, we're jumping a little bit here. This is my thesis piece from grad school. So this is we got to show at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. We had a gallery under construction, so that was a pretty amazing opportunity. It's a combination of 4 different gestures on this little platform, basically. People couldn't walk on it. It was sort of a space that you couldn't get into. So bubbles coming up through the floor, I figured out how to mechanize my performance, basically. People walked up, it was motion censored, and they started coming up through this knot. The pull string referenced the on and off. This bucket, actually 35 feet in the air, so this is a big old car dealership, actually, is where the show was. I put a dehumidifier up there, and that was dripping down into the bucket, which had some heat under it, so it was sort of sizzling it away. So this sort of, physicality that going back into thin air, basically. See, this one's too fast. And then the cigarette left laying on the floorboard, just smoking away. So I really was, in this case, thinking about implying a presence, like maybe someone just left, kind of like hot on the tracks of like, I don't know what you're investigating, but you can kind of tell like the string's still moving, but thinking about like the human figure without depicting it. Another piece, well, sort of a version of the piece that's in the gallery right now. I made this piece at Oxbow. Just sort of pulled some wood out of I had the doorknob for a while, and I knew I sort of wanted to make it spin, but I just sort of, one day I pulled some wood out of the, they were gonna burn it, I think, and it was part of a door stop. And like, again, so sort of, I've started to have a plan a lot more when I'm creating, and then sort of going back from that, it's like, being really impulsive can also create really interesting results. So the plan was never to just lean the planks, but I mocked it up and it was like, there we go, that's kind of working. This piece definitely relates to the aerosol can and also the implied figure. Like I mimicked the gallery, so that first ledge is there along the window, and then I built the little piece that comes out. And basically the cup just sits there steaming, like someone just left it by accident. And then, you go, actually I had people tell me, they were like, I went in like 3 times before I realized that wasn't, that was a piece of work. And then they look down into it, and there's actually a little drain down there. That's what the steam is coming through. Oops. have two versions of this piece, so I'll try to go kind of quickly through the first one so I don't drag it out. But sorry, I'll let this go. So those are all bubbles coming through the floor. This is a fun show to be a part of. I went down to Charleston for a time-based media festival. Most people had videos, and I did this entire room installation. Put in all of the wooden floors. People could actually walk on it this time, and it was, again, motion censored. So when someone walked in, there was like a moment where you sort of felt a rumble, and then all of a sudden, all these bubbles start to come up through the holes in the floor. And the space was really strange. It was like an office space in like a 150-year-old building or something like that. So when I made this guy is really tall, but when I made the floor, like 5 or 6 inches taller, like the ceiling, it sort of became this like really, really weird space to be in with a really clean smell. So, and then this is the piece I just did for Art Prize, so it's another iteration of Breathing Room. This was in the Old Grand Rapids Public Museum, so this museum actually got abandoned almost 20 years ago. Has a lot of the old dioramas in it, a lot of the old paintings where they were like showing, Midwest life or, art, like archiving everything. This is actually the room where they did the taxidermy for a bunch of the exhibits. So a lot of animals were preserved there. And, oops, right here. I did all my own lighting for it. Basically, the negative spaces were, the knots had soap coming out of them, and then any other negative space had light coming out of them. And I had the light actually shifting. There was a lot of air in the room, and I just sort of tried to tap into this like really alive historic space. A lot of things that happened there. This is a performance piece I did actually in Pilsen. It was 2 summers ago. So it was one evening, and it was a lot of dough making, basically. I don't have any video for this piece, but I had multiple timers going. I pretty much made dough as quick as I could. I had flour, water, salt. I had to heat up the water so the thing would whistle, the timers would go off. I was, trying to keep up with all these things. So again, sort of about these cycles and, things we put ourselves through, I guess, in a way. And then we left the dough there overnight, and in the morning it had like taken over the entire platform. So kind of, again, smell, there was this like wonderful yeast smell coming. The whole sculpture was kind of growing, and then referencing domestic life. This piece is called My Pleasure. This was down in Louisville, Kentucky last February. Again, 4 little gestures on a platform, a few of them that you've seen before, a few maybe new. So there's the bag, the fly, the cigarette, and the bubbles. This is my aversion to politeness. I think it's good to be polite, but I guess I was sort of talking about, when you're obligated to be that way. And, there's this like hyperventilating wall and this fly buzzing overhead and this steaming or smoking cigarette and then the bubbles coming from below. So sort of just subtle ways to talk about that idea. And then, these are gonna go quick. Oops. These are things I'm working on at 3 walls right now, so they're not finished. So sorry, the videos aren't that great either because they're not quite done. That was a loudspeaker, like a horn loudspeaker, and I just have a little drip coming through it. So sort of a visual version of, maybe like sound coming through a loudspeaker. I love when you can. I do it with a lot of my work is really light, and I'll do it often where I just sort of like make a big movement, And you can, like 10 seconds later, the air reaches the object and it sort of moves around. So I'm playing around with that idea of, just sort of showing, the air was traveling that whole time. I don't know if it'll be a piece of paper or not. This is a window shade that's on a slow motor. So this is how fast it actually moves. I did I think an 8 times faster version of the video so you can actually see things happening. But it basically, the motor reverses when it gets stuck, so that the shade, it gets off and it sort of like tries to go, and if it can't, it'll reverse. And so the thing sort of just like writhes and flops around, but tries to like make order out of chaos. So yeah, again, a lot faster than it actually is. It's really a mess. But you find yourself like rooting for it for some reason. You're like, come on, you can do it. Yeah. Anyway, I think you get the picture on that one. Unless you want to see it write itself one more time. And then I just started a series. I had a really frustrating day. I was trying to make a swarm of flies, and I kept getting all tangled up, and I was like, oh goodness, I can't deal with a motor, I can't deal with these threads. Like, had to leave the studio, came back the next day, and I was like, all right, a break from motors. And so this 2x3, 8-foot 2x3 is suspended just by a bungee cord in the middle of the room. And I just started playing around with how I could make it balance. So I'm calling it Still Life and Balance, working title. Again, sort of a new work. But I like thinking about, like putting salt on it. It's like, oh, you spilled the salt. There's like all these things related to like bad luck and spilling salt, or, putting this pan lid on the end. And, you think about like, if this fell, that would be really loud, which has happened, of course. It's pepper, soap, and some popcorn kernels. So those have been really fun. It's been a nice break from, from mechanized work. This is a little mantra I wrote a few years back. If you sniff and daydream, suspend belief, jump and remember, peek and wonder, consider then remark. Identify yourself under the sheet. Think of 2 things at once. Disrupt your assumptions, then I have succeeded. So that is that. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys have them. Cool. Well, you can ask me in person too. I think we're gonna go eat a little bit of food and look at the work. So.
Nobody has any questions at all? Come on, you guys. You get it?
Yeah.
When you're like creating your work, you said there was one performance thing. Are you interested in the process at all? Like, is the process kind of part of it? Trying to figure it out and things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. I've many times, again, because I'm not a mechanical thinker, but I want my work to move, so it's like this huge struggle, and I've thought about hiring my work out. Like, I have a brother-in-law that would be so good at it. He's a structural engineer, like he could make this work. But I think that the solutions that I come to, because I don't know how to make a machine, are definitely, maybe it's like being in the art barn, where you have to work with what you have, and I think often more creative solutions happen because of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think sort of related to that, I'm kind of curious about, you seem to quite often choose to sort of show the clunkiness of the mechanism or something like that. Sometimes you hide it, but can you talk about that choice and why sometimes you do? Yeah.
I feel with certain pieces, I feel like if you saw, or if you didn't know how it was working, which I do that. I mean, this aerosol bottle and the bag, like you really don't know how those are happening. But a lot of them I like to show that so that you're not thinking about like, oh, how is this happening? Because I'm not a magician, I'm an artist, I guess. And I think some of the machines are really funny and add to the work. So usually my preference is that you would see the gesture, then the mechanism, but sometimes it's not possible to get them that far apart from each other. So.
I don't know, I like that part quite a bit because I feel like it relates to me, at least to Oliver Eliason's work a little bit, and the way he tries to sort of show you the mechanism in order to sort of make you understand how you see those things or how you see those gestures.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I haven't put words to that, but I think that is part of it too. Definitely.
Well, there's this really lowbrow, like Richard Tuttle aesthetic to it that's very engaging. It seems really accessible. That if your structural engineer brother-in-law did it, you'd go, geez, that's really cool, but be intimidating.
But yeah, and I think it helps keep the poetry in the objects too. Because yeah, I mean, there's so many things manufactured that I'm never going to compare to that manufacturing. So it has to be about how it works a little bit, I think. I get Richard Tuttle a lot, actually.
Lisa, when you talked about the kitchen table drawings, you talked a lot about their meditative function for you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you apply that same way of talking to the works in motion?
I would say those are more bred out of that meditative space, and then I find that like meditative space after I make them. They're not, and I think maybe it has to do with my disconnect from like knowing how to do it. So there's more trial and error and frustration involved in making those pieces, but there's like the ah moment after you get it to work that I feel like does relate a lot to that. Yeah. Occasionally they happen.
I'm sorry, to the audience or something if not.
Yeah, and that's when I can achieve that, then I definitely feel that, feel proud of myself. That's why I keep making them, so, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, two things. How did you decide what you're going to put in that space? Because I'm glad I'm here tonight because I got to see the jump rope thing, I got to see the bubble thing, and the cigarette lure. So, what, you couldn't fit it all in the... How do you decide what you're bringing on the road, kind of thing?
I guess it depends. I mean, I thought about doing an entire installation here, kind of like the no vacancy piece, which is the one with the bubbles and the cigarette. So that.
We could have fit the coffee cup.
Yeah, I mean, so partly it has to do with a balance of the different gestures together. In this case, it was a lot about like caricature and so a bit over the top. I was thinking about these objects that you relate to, that you have an experience with. I sort of wipe them clean and then let them do something, so you sort of bring your own experience to it. So yeah, I sort of edited out the ones that were really specific.
Well, I'm glad I'm here for the ones that. And then number two, I'm not an artist, and so I could relate to this thing at the kitchen table where maybe I could be an artist if I just spent enough time just at the kitchen table meditating about something I might create. So are you saying that then you really do deliberately use that time to rejuvenate, and that's the sole purpose for it?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was like, I should make drawings, so I had to force myself to do it. It was like, even sort of pragmatically as an installation artist and a kinetic artist, I was like, I need something that's sort of tangible. I need to be able to hang things in a gallery that like someone could take home with them. So, that wasn't the sole reason, but it was sort of part of it, just thinking about how to make an art practice that sort of works overall. But I have fallen in love with the process, and it's inspired road trips, and it's, inspired new work. And it's hard to get to a contemplative space in your head. It takes a lot of, it's weird that you have to try so hard to not think about anything, but you really do. And I think when I can get to that space, then I think about the objects around me in a better way that's more relevant to my work. So yeah, I'm sure you could be an artist. You should just invest the time. Yeah?
Okay. So like with some of your pieces, like with the whole seeming like someone was just there and everything, and with the art praise one that you showed us with the lighting coming from wherever it was coming, it sort of seemed like it gave off an eerie feel some of the time. Is that like part of the goal?
Yeah, so similar to the like tickling one too, like I love to refer to or actually make someone feel a really strong feeling when they, so every once in a while, yes, it is sort of a eerie, implied presence. Like I live in a really old house too, so you have those moments where you're just like, something's creaking, and you like, you get a pit in your stomach, and I'm like, those are really strong emotions, strong feelings to have. So I do try to tap into some of that. Yeah.
You were talking about creating a practice, and so can you talk a little bit about your life, how you do this, how you fund this, how you put bread on the table?
Sure. Yeah. I am also a professional photographer, so that I thought about teaching, and I think I would like to do that at some point. But right now, I'm taking this, like, I have a really heavy on season. I do a lot of photography, and then I have an off season, which is right now, which I book a lot of exhibitions, travel quite a bit, whether it's getting inspiration or showing work or giving lectures or whatever. I started out applying for a lot of things, and I'm 3 years out of grad school, so it hasn't really been that long. And at first I, had to figure out where every next show was going to be. And then more recently, like the thing that I just did, and I tried really hard, and I, hopefully put up a really good show. Someone saw that, and it sort of like works into the next exhibition. And then, yeah, as far as just having the complementary work, I just think it's important to try new things when you're an artist, It's like, yeah, I could keep making things spin forever, but I'm not going to be inspired by that. So, even if you don't really feel like making a drawing, it's good to, just try something new, or, go to the print seminar if you don't know printing or whatever.
So I want you to go back to the making a living piece.
Okay.
Be more specific. How do you do that? What's the day like? What's the year like? How did you get started doing what you're doing?
I get in the studio as much as possible, which, like I was saying earlier, certain times of the year are more and certain times are less. I definitely am supporting my practice right now quite a bit with photography. So, I found another creative thing that I can do that leaves a lot of time and space for me to do this kind of work.
So when you're doing photography, what are you shooting? Who are you doing it for?
Photography is client-based, a lot of people, so portraits, events, some weddings and that kind of thing. Yeah. It's really complimentary though, and maybe that's partly why I'm not doing photographic work in my practice. I did that series, and it's kind of like, that's like how I make money, and that's how and I like doing it, but it's separate. Like, it's really hard for me to like make it both for some reason. So. Just the way my brain works, I guess. I need to like compartmentalize things. Yeah.
Do you have a preference for one or the other?
What do you mean?
Like photography and studio, like if you could just abandon photography,
Oh.
would you do it?
It'd be hard to get rid of it completely. I would like to spend more time in the studio. That's even a goal of 2013 is, and that's part of the reason I booked this residency was, that's all I'm doing while I'm there. I'm not even in touch with clients. Like, it's completely focused momentum building time, hopefully. So, yeah.
When you say you booked this residency, so you're living in this gallery because now you don't have to leave your little Winnebago. You have got your own gallery space that is like your studio, and you just wake up every morning and you create new stuff. So you're not with your husband in Holland, Michigan, where you belong. You're in Chicago. No heat.
He has been here quite a bit, actually, and he's doing photography work in the city, so it's working out really well. But yeah, distractions of home, it's part of what my work's about, right? It's a distracting, your day-to-day life is distracting, or can be. So, just removing yourself, and I feel like sometimes that's all it takes to think about something more clearly. Yeah.
You set the amount of time that you're gonna make a drawing, or maybe you know when you're done?
I never can stick to the time I set if I do set it. I'll say like, or even if I'm with somebody and I'm like, okay, in like an hour, I'm gonna be done with this and we can go. And it's like, it definitely, I don't know if it's like an OCD tendency or what, it like clicks at a certain point and I'm like, that's good now. So yeah, I wish, and it's weird because they're like kind of scribbly and they're like mark making, and it's just weird that there's like good and bad ones, and some get built up too much and some get too many marks, or they need marks in certain places. There's a very like intuitive finishing point with those. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much for having me. And definitely pull me aside if you have questions. I'd be happy to talk about the work or your work or whatever. So,
Or if you come help us deinstall,
Or-
you have
yeah.
very intimate time to see the mechanism behind the...
pick my brain. Feel free. Yeah, I'll show you the tricks inside the cardboard box.
Thanks.
Thank you.